The invisible walls of the world screamed as they tore apart. High above the busy streets of Seoul, the sky did not just turn blue or black. It turned the color of static on an old television set. People on the sidewalk stopped walking. They looked up in fear. A loud noise like a breaking bone cracked the air. It was not a magic gate opening. It was something crashing through the glass of reality. A shape fell from the jagged hole in the sky. It fell fast and hard. It hit the pavement of a busy intersection with a sound like a bomb going off. Cars swerved and crashed into light poles to avoid the impact. Dust and black smoke filled the air instantly. A yellow taxi was crushed flat under the force of the landing. The metal of the car groaned. In the center of the smoke, a hand reached up from the wreckage. It was covered in a dirty red glove. The hand grabbed the sharp edge of a car door. A man pulled himself up from the crushed metal. His suit was tight and red with black patches around the eyes. He had 2 swords strapped to his back. His body was twisted and broken from the fall. His legs were bent the wrong way. But then they started to move on their own. Bones snapped back into place with a wet, gross sound. The people watching covered their mouths. They were used to hunters and monsters, but they had never seen a body fix itself like that. It looked painful and unnatural. The man stood up and dusted off his shoulders. He looked around at the terrified crowd and the broken street. Then something strange happened. A blue window appeared in front of his face. It was the system that all awakened hunters knew. But the window was flickering. It was glitching. The text on the blue screen was not clear. It was a mess of random symbols and numbers. The system was confused. It tried to measure the man's power level. It tried to assign him a class. But the numbers kept spinning and crashing. The window turned red, then blue again. The man in the red suit poked the floating blue window with his finger. The window shattered like real glass and fell to the ground in digital shards. A deep rumble shook the ground beneath the city. Far away, deep inside a shadow, a powerful king opened his glowing blue eyes. Jinwoo Song felt a cold chill run down his spine. He felt a sickness in the air. Something had entered his world that did not belong. It was not a monster. It was not a ruler. It was something that broke the rules of existence. The man in red pulled out a black pistol and checked the magazine. He did not seem to know where he was, but he did not seem scared. He started walking down the street as police sirens wailed in the distance. The world of hunters and monsters ran on strict logic. There were levels, there were ranks, there were limits to magic. But this new arrival was a chaotic stain on a clean picture. As he walked, more blue boxes kept popping up around his head, trying to scan him. Every time they tried, they sparked and vanished. The system was trying to delete him, but it could not. He was a permanent error. The timeline had just cracked, and the man in the red suit was the hammer that broke it. The sirens grew louder as police cars boxed in the intersection. Officers crouched behind their doors with guns drawn. They shouted warnings in Korean, but the man in the red suit did not seem to care. He was busy picking glass shards out of his arm. He held up a finger to tell them to wait. The officers were nervous. They were trained to handle monster breaks, not a crazy man in a costume who fell from the sky. One young officer's hand shook on his trigger. The man in red finished pulling a long piece of glass from his elbow. He sighed loudly. Then he looked directly at the police. He started talking in English, but his voice was muffled by his mask. He put his hands on his hips and tilted his head. To the police, he looked like a villain from a low-budget movie. But the scanner in the leading officer's hand was making a strange noise. It was not detecting any magic power. It read 0. In this world, 0 meant a normal human. But a normal human would be dead after falling from the sky. The man in red took a step forward. The young officer panicked and fired his gun. The bullet hit the man in the chest. The man stumbled back. He looked down at the hole in his suit. He sounded annoyed. Then he did something that made the police freeze. He dug his finger into the bullet hole and popped the bullet out. The wound closed up in seconds. There was no magic light. No healer was nearby. It just stitched itself back together like melting wax. The police lowered their guns slightly, their eyes wide with confusion. This broke the rules of their world. Hunters used mana to protect themselves. They used healers to fix wounds. This man just erased the damage. He waved at them and then started jogging away down the street. He moved fast, jumping over the hood of a police car. He laughed as he ran, disappearing into the maze of the city. In the headquarters of the Korean Hunters Association, the mood was tense. Woo Jinchul stood in front of a wall of screens. He was the chief of the monitoring division. His job was to watch for dangerous hunters and irregular gates. Today, every screen was flashing red. Technicians were typing furiously. One of them called out to the chief. They had footage of the crash site. Jinchul watched the video of the man healing from a bullet wound. His face remained calm, but his mind was racing. The man had no mana signature. He was invisible to their sensors until he physically touched something. This was a nightmare for security. If a villain could walk through magical barriers without setting off alarms, the entire city was at risk. Jinchul ordered a team of A-rank hunters to track the target. He told them to capture him, not kill him. He needed to know what this thing was. Meanwhile, the man in red was walking through a shopping district. He looked at the signs. He could not read the language. He stopped at a food stall and tried to buy a hot dog with a crumpled piece of paper that had a picture of a dead president on it. The vendor yelled at him. The man shrugged and took a bite of the hot dog anyway. The vendor grabbed a broom and hit him. The man let himself get hit. He acted like it hurt, falling over dramatically. Then he jumped up and ran away again. He turned a corner and saw something that made him stop. In the middle of a construction site, there was a swirling blue vortex. It was a gate. It was the entrance to a dungeon. The man in red clapped his hands. He thought he had found the level entrance. He walked right past the warning tape. A worker tried to stop him, but the man just pushed past him gently. He walked into the blue light and vanished. Inside the gate, the air was hot and smelled like sulfur. It was a C-rank dungeon. The environment looked like a cave made of red rock. A group of 10 hunters was moving carefully through the tunnel. They were a standard raid team. They had a tank, 2 healers, 3 mages, and 4 damage dealers. They were fighting a pack of giant lizard men. The lizards were strong. The tank, a big man with a shield, was holding back 2 lizards. The mages were casting fireballs from behind. It was a controlled fight. They were winning. Then footsteps echoed from behind them. The hunters turned around, distracted. A man in a red suit walked out of the shadows. He looked at the lizard men and cheered. The distraction was costly. One of the lizard men spun around and swung a heavy club at the mages. The tank shouted a warning, but he was too slow. The club was about to crush a female mage. Suddenly, a flash of silver metal flew through the air. A sword spun and hit the lizard man in the eye. The monster roared and dropped the club. The man in red was standing there with one hand extended. He had thrown the sword. He walked past the stunned hunters. He pulled a black pistol from his hip. He aimed it at the lizard man's head. He pulled the trigger. The gunshot was deafening in the cave. The monster's head exploded. The hunters flinched. They were used to magic, swords, and arrows. Gunpowder weapons did not work well on monsters because bullets usually lacked mana. But this man's gun was different. It did not use mana. It just used pure force. The man in red did not stop. He ran at the other lizards. He moved like a dancer. He dodged a claw swipe by bending his back all the way to the ground. He kicked a lizard in the knee, breaking it. He pulled his sword out of the dead monster and started slashing. His fighting style was messy. He wasted energy. He spun around when he didn't need to. He talked to the monsters while he killed them. The hunters just watched. They did not know if he was a friend or an enemy. The raid leader, a B-rank swordsman, stepped forward. He yelled at the man to identify himself. The man in red ignored him. He finished killing the last lizard and wiped his blade on his leg. Then he turned to the hunters. He pointed at the dead monsters and made a gesture for money. The raid leader shook his head. He told his team to stay back. Suddenly, the ground shook. The boss of the dungeon was waking up. From the deeper part of the cave, a massive twin-headed ogre emerged. It was huge, scraping the ceiling of the cave. The hunters felt the pressure of its magic power. It was a high C-rank boss, bordering on B-rank. The tank raised his shield, sweating. The healers prepared their spells. The man in red looked at the ogre and whistled. He ran straight at it. The raid leader screamed at him to stop. The ogre swung a massive fist. The man in red did not dodge. He jumped right into the punch. The impact sounded like a car crash. The man was smashed into the cave wall. He stuck there for a second, then peeled off and fell to the ground. His body looked like a crushed soda can. His chest was flat. His neck was broken. The hunters gasped. The raid leader cursed. He thought the idiot was dead. The ogre roared and turned its attention to the hunters. But then, a low groan came from the pile of red and black rags on the floor. Bones crunched loudly. The sound echoed in the quiet cave. Snap, crack, pop. The man's chest inflated back to normal size. His head twisted around and locked back into place. He stood up. He shook his head to clear the dizziness. He looked angry now. He pulled out 2 submachine guns from nowhere. He unleashed a storm of bullets at the ogre. The bullets chipped away at the ogre's tough skin. The ogre was confused. It had killed the little red thing. Why was it standing up? The man ran between the ogre's legs. He slashed the back of its ankles with his swords. The ogre fell to its knees. The hunters realized they had to help. The raid leader gave the order. The mages fired ice spears. The tank charged forward to bash the ogre's shins. The man in red worked with them, but he was reckless. He let the ogre bite his arm just so he could stab it in the eye. Blood sprayed everywhere. It was brutal and efficient in a sick way. Finally, the ogre collapsed. It turned into black smoke, leaving behind a large mana stone. The man in red grabbed the stone before it hit the ground. He held it up and looked at it. The raid leader stepped forward. He pointed his sword at the man. By the laws of the Hunter Association, the loot belonged to the raid team. The man in red looked at the sword, then at the stone. He tossed the stone to the raid leader. He did not care about the rock. He cared that no blue window had appeared. He had killed the boss, but he did not get any experience points. He looked up at the ceiling of the cave and yelled at the invisible game developers. The hunters backed away. They were terrified. This man was immortal. That was the only explanation. High above the city, on the balcony of a luxury apartment, Jinwoo's Song was reading a book. He paused. He felt a disturbance in the shadows. His shadow soldiers were connected to him. He could sense what they sensed. He had placed a few soldiers in the monitoring division to keep an eye on things. He knew about the anomaly, but now he felt something else. A gate nearby had a strange presence inside. It was not a strong presence like a dragon or a monarch. It was a hollow presence. It felt like a void. Jinwoo stood up. His eyes glowed blue. He needed to see this for himself. He used shadow exchange. One moment he was on his balcony, and the next moment he was standing in the shadow of a tree outside the construction site. The gate was vibrating. The raid team was coming out. They looked pale. They ran out of the gate as fast as they could. Behind them walked the man in the red suit. He was humming a song. He was covered in monster blood, but he had no wounds. Jinwoo watched him from the shadows. He used his sensory skills. He tried to read the man's level. The system usually gave him information on everyone, but when he looked at the man in red, the system gave him nothing. No name, no class, no level, just a blank error message. Jinwoo stepped out from the tree. He wore a simple black hoodie and pants. He put his hands in his pockets. The man in red saw him. The man stopped humming. He stared at Jinwoo. He looked at Jinwoo's glowing eyes. He looked at the dark aura surrounding him. The man in red clapped slowly. He walked over to Jinwoo. He did not seem afraid of the aura that made S-rank hunters tremble. He stood right in front of Jinwoo. He was slightly taller than the Shadow Monarch. He leaned in close. Jinwoo did not move. He did not flinch. He let his murderous intent leak out just a little bit. It was enough pressure to make a normal person faint. The air became heavy and cold. The ground cracked slightly under Jinwoo's feet. The man in red just shivered and rubbed his arms. He acted like it was a cold breeze, not the threat of death. He spoke to Jinwoo. The language barrier was still there, but Jinwoo could understand the tone. It was mocking. The man pointed at Jinwoo's shadow. He pointed at the darkness. He made a hand puppet motion. Jinwoo narrowed his eyes. He decided to test this stranger. He lifted one finger. Behind the man in red, the shadow on the ground rose up. Igris, the blood-red commander, stepped out. Igris was huge, clad in black armor with a long red plume on his helmet. He held a massive sword. The man in red spun around. He saw the knight. He did not scream. He looked excited. He drew his two swords. They looked like toothpicks compared to Igris's blade. Igris moved faster than sound. He swung his sword in a horizontal arc. The man in red tried to block. It was a mistake. The force of Igris's blow shattered the man's swords instantly. The blade continued and cut the man in red cleanly in half at the waist. The top half of his body flew through the air and landed in the dirt. The bottom half crumpled to the ground. Blood pooled instantly. Igris stood still, waiting for the order to finish the job. Jinwoo watched. He expected the fight to be over. He expected the presence to fade. But the presence did not fade. The top half of the man rolled over. He was still alive. He was not screaming in pain. He was complaining. He used his hands to crawl over to his legs. He grabbed his legs and pulled them close. Black smoke did not rise from his body like a monster. Instead, tiny fibers of flesh reached out from his waist. They connected the two halves. The man pushed himself together. He lay there for a moment. Then he sat up. He checked his suit. It was ruined. He looked at Igris and gave him a thumbs up. Jinwoo felt a rare emotion. He felt disturbed. He had seen resurrection. He could bring back the dead as shadows. But shadows were dead. They were cold. This man was alive. He was biological, and he refused to die. Jinwoo called Igris back. The knight bowed and vanished into the shadow. Jinwoo walked over to the man who was currently knitting his spine back together. Jinwoo spoke in perfect English. He asked the man what he was. The man in red looked up. He seemed surprised that Jinwoo spoke English. He finished healing and stood up. He dusted himself off. He introduced himself as Deadpool. He extended a blood-stained hand for a handshake. Jinwoo did not take the hand. He stared at Deadpool. He realized that this being was a variable that could not be calculated. The system was silent. Jinwoo asked why he was here. Deadpool shrugged. He mimed falling from the sky. He pointed at the sky and then at the ground. He looked around at the city. He asked if there were any chimichangas nearby. Jinwoo ignored the question. He sensed the approach of the association's monitoring team. The A-rank hunters were arriving. They surrounded the construction site. Jinwoo did not want to be involved in a public scene. He decided to leave. He told Deadpool that if he caused harm to innocent people, he would kill him. Deadpool laughed. He told Jinwoo that he couldn't be killed. Jinwoo's eyes glowed brighter. He said that everyone could die. It was just a matter of how many times it took. Then Jinwoo dissolved into the shadows and vanished. Deadpool was left alone as the A-rank hunters jumped over the fence. They were led by a fierce-looking tank with a giant hammer. They shouted at Deadpool to get on his knees. Deadpool looked at the hunters. He looked at their serious faces. He looked at their glowing weapons. He sighed. He realized this was going to be a long day. He raised his hands in surrender, but he kept one finger on the trigger of his hidden pistol. He let them cuff him. The handcuffs were made of reinforced steel, designed to hold awakened hunters. They felt tight. The hunters dragged him to a containment truck. They treated him like a monster. Inside the truck, it was dark. Deadpool sat on a metal bench. He leaned his head back. The healing factor was making him hungry. His body was burning energy to fix the damage from Igris's sword. He closed his eyes. He thought about the guy in the black hoodie. That guy was scary. He felt like death incarnate. Deadpool liked him. He wondered if they could be friends. The truck hit a bump. Deadpool opened his eyes. He saw a blue window flickering in the corner of the dark truck. It was trying to load a profile again. Name, Wade Wilson. Class error. Title, The Glitch. Passive skill, plot armor, broken. The text scrambled and vanished. Deadpool chuckled. The game was trying to understand him. But you can't program chaos. He waited for the ride to end, ready to see who was in charge of this strange, serious world. He hoped they had better snacks than the last universe. The truck sped towards the high-security wing of the Hunter Association. The city outside was starting to panic. The news was reporting an immortal villain. The peace that the hunters had fought for was starting to crack, just a little bit. And in the shadows, the enemies of humanity were watching too. They saw the anomaly, and they were curious. The containment truck hissed as the pneumatic locks disengaged. The heavy steel doors swung open, revealing the underground loading dock of the Korean Hunters Association headquarters. It was a fortress of concrete and mana-reinforced steel. Woo Jinchul stood waiting with a squad of the monitoring division's elites. They were not taking chances. The man in the red suit stepped out, his hands still cuffed in the suppression shackles. He blinked in the harsh fluorescent lights. He looked at the armed guards and whistled a low, impressed note. He was marched down long, sterile corridors. Hunters and staff stopped to look. They whispered. Rumors had already spread about the immortal who registered 0 on the manoscopes. They brought him to an interrogation room designed for A-rank criminals. The walls were lined with magic dampeners. Jinchul sat on one side of a metal table. Deadpool sat on the other. Jinchul placed a file on the table. It was empty. He stared at Deadpool with cold, professional eyes. He asked for a name. Deadpool gave him 3 fake names before settling on Wade Wilson. Jinchul wrote it down. Then he asked for his rank. Wade leaned forward, resting his chin on his cuffed hands. He said his rank was Plastic IV in a game Jinchul had never heard of. Jinchul did not smile. He signaled to the mirror on the wall. A mage in the observation room activated a truth detection spell. The air shimmered. Wade sneezed. The spell shattered instantly. The mage in the other room grabbed his head, nose bleeding. The system could not enforce truth on a being that existed outside its logic. Jinchul frowned. He realized standard procedures were useless. He decided to be direct. He told Wade that he was a threat to national security. He explained that beings without mana signatures were usually monsters. Wade interrupted. He asked about the dental plan for hunters. Jinchul slammed his hand on the table. The metal dented. He told Wade this was not a joke. People had died today. Wade went quiet. The white eyes of his mask narrowed. He told Jinchul that people always die. He said he did not kill the innocent, only the bad guys, and occasionally the annoying guys. Jinchul asked who decided who was bad. Wade pointed a finger at his own head. Suddenly, the lights in the room flickered. A low hum began to vibrate through the floor. It was not the hum of electricity. It was the hum of magic power, but it was erratic. Jinchul stood up, his hand going to his earpiece. He asked for a status report. The voice in his ear was panicked. The sensory array for the entire building was going haywire. Mana readings were spiking and dropping randomly. It was as if the laws of physics were fluctuating. Jinchul looked at Wade. Wade looked at the ceiling. He said he felt a tingle. He said it felt like the writers were retconning something. An alarm blared. It was the code red alarm. A dungeon break. But this was the headquarters. There were no gates here. Jinchul drew his weapon. He looked at the observation glass. It shattered inward. A massive, clawed hand reached through the broken window and dragged the bleeding mage out. Jinchul kicked the table into the wall and grabbed Wade. He unlocked the cuffs. He needed every able body, even this lunatic. He told Wade to fight. Wade rubbed his wrists and complained about the chafing. They ran into the hallway. It was a slaughterhouse. The fabric of reality in the hallway was tearing. Blue pixels floated in the air like dust. From these tears, monsters were pouring out. They were not normal monsters. They were jagged, shifting shapes. Some looked like wolves with 3 heads. Others looked like knights made of black glass. They were system enforcement constructs. The system, unable to delete Wade, was trying to physically purge the area he was in. It treated the headquarters as a corrupted file. Jinchul engaged the glass knight. He moved with the speed of an A-rank hunter. He punched the knight in the chest. His fist should have shattered the armor. Instead, a blue box appeared in the air. Connection error. The force of his punch evaporated. Jinchul stumbled, his balance thrown off. The knight swung a jagged sword. Jinchul barely dodged. He realized with horror that his skills were lagging. The system that governed their strength was failing because of the anomaly. He shouted to his men to fall back. The hunters in the hallway were dying. A B-rank healer tried to cast a regeneration spell on a wounded guard. The spell fizzled and turned into a burst of fire, burning the guard instead. The healer screamed in confusion. The logic of their world was breaking down. Wade jumped into the fray. He did not use skills. He used a submachine gun he had pulled from a dead guard's holster. He sprayed bullets at the wolves. The bullets hit. Physics still worked for him. He kicked a wolf in the jaw and stabbed it with a piece of broken glass. He laughed maniacally. He yelled that the server ping was too high for the noobs. Jinchul watched Wade fight. It was chaotic and unrefined, but it was effective. Wade was the only one moving at full speed. The monsters seemed to focus on him. They swarmed him. A wolf bit into Wade's leg, tearing the muscle away. Wade screamed a curse word, hopped on one leg, and shot the wolf in the ear. The leg muscle knit itself back together in seconds. Jinchul realized the terrifying truth. Wade was a cancer to this world. His presence alone was causing the system to attack its own users to get to him. They had to evacuate the chairman. Go Gun-hee was in his office on the top floor. Jinchul shouted at Wade to follow him. They fought their way to the stairs. The elevators were crushed. The metal doors twisted like paper. They climbed the stairs, fighting monsters on every landing. Wade took point. He acted as a meat shield. He took arrows, claws, and acid spit. His suit was tattered, revealing the scarred, cancerous skin underneath. He looked like a walking corpse. He kept talking the whole time, making references to movies Jinchul had never seen. It was annoying, but Jinchul was grateful. Without the immortal meat shield, Jinchul would have been dead 10 times over due to his failing skills. They reached the top floor. The double doors to the chairman's office were blasted open. Inside, Go Gun-hee stood surrounded by light. He was transforming. His body grew larger, his muscles tearing through his suit. The ruler's vessel was preparing to fight. Facing him was a creature that looked like a void. It was a humanoid shape made of static. It held a scythe that crackled with blue electricity. It was a corrupted system administrator program. Go Gun-hee threw a punch of pure light. The administrator blocked it with one hand. The impact shook the building. Go Gun-hee gasped. His mana was being drained just by touching the creature. The administrator raised its scythe. Jinchul screamed the chairman's name. He tried to sprint forward, but his legs locked up. A paralysis debuff had been applied to everyone in the room except the target. Wade walked past the frozen Jinchul. He walked right up to the administrator. The creature turned its faceless head toward him. It spoke in a voice that sounded like grinding metal. It said, "Target identified. Delete." The scythe swung down. Wade did not dodge. He caught the blade with his bare hands. The blade sliced through his palms, cutting halfway down his forearms. Blood sprayed over the white carpet. Wade gritted his teeth. He held the blade fast. He looked at the creature and told it that it had a glitch. The creature tried to pull the scythe back, but Wade's bones had healed around the blade, trapping it. Wade headbutted the creature. The static face rippled. Wade did it again, and again. He was not using mana. He was using brute force and insanity. The creature pulsed with energy, blasting Wade backward. Wade flew out of the office window, shattering the glass. He fell 60 stories. Jinchul watched in horror. The creature turned back to Go Gun-hee, but the fight had bought them time. The shadows in the corner of the room lengthened. A black soldier rose from the floor. Then another. Then 100. The shadow army had arrived. Iron, the giant tank shadow, roared and slammed his shield into the administrator. Tusk, the high orc mage, blasted it with a beam of gravity magic. The administrator staggered. It could negate living hunters, but it struggled against the dead mana of the Shadow Monarch. Jinwoo stepped out of the shadow behind Go Gun-hee. He looked furious. His eyes were burning with blue flame. He placed a hand on Go Gun-hee's shoulder, stabilizing the old man's mana flow. Jinwoo looked at the administrator. He recognized it. It was part of the system that had trained him, but it was broken. It was acting on a primitive survival instinct. Jinwoo commanded his army to attack. The office became a war zone. Down on the street, Wade hit the pavement. He landed on a parked bus, crushing the roof. He lay there for a long minute. His spine was dust. His organs were jelly. Slowly, painfully, his heart started to beat again. He coughed up blood. He rolled off the bus and landed on the sidewalk. Passers-by screamed and ran. Wade ignored them. He looked up at the hole in the building 60 floors up. He saw the flashes of blue and purple light. He knew the big boss had arrived. Wade cracked his neck. He felt tired, not physically, but mentally. Being a glitch was exhausting. He found the lobby entrance and walked back into the building. The monsters in the lobby were gone, killed by shadows. Wade took the stairs again. It took him 20 minutes to climb back up. When he arrived, the fight was over. The office was destroyed. The administrator was gone, dissipated into data fragments. Go Gun-hee was sitting in a chair, breathing heavily. Jinchul was leaning against a wall, looking pale. Jinwoo was standing in the center of the room, looking at a small, floating blue crystal. It was the core of the administrator. Jinwoo crushed the crystal in his hand. He turned to the door as Wade walked in. Wade looked terrible. He was missing an ear, and his suit was basically ribbons. He leaned against the doorframe and asked if they won. Jinwoo did not answer. He walked over to Wade. The atmosphere was heavy. Go Gun-hee watched carefully. He had seen the chaos Wade caused. He had seen the system turn against them. Jinwoo spoke quietly. He said that the system tried to erase Wade. He said that as long as Wade remained, the system would keep trying. It would send stronger purges. It would risk destroying the world to remove the error. Wade nodded. He understood. He was the virus. He asked Jinwoo what the plan was. He asked if Jinwoo was going to kill him. Wade said he wouldn't mind trying, but it probably wouldn't stick. Jinwoo shook his head. He said killing Wade wouldn't work because Wade wasn't part of the cycle of life and death regulated by this world. Sending him back was impossible because the hole he fell through had closed. There was only one option. They had to hide him. They had to take him off the grid. Jinwoo offered Wade a place in the dungeons. He could live in the instant dungeons where the system's influence was weaker. He could fight monsters forever. Wade thought about it. Infinite combat. No rules, no police. It sounded like a vacation. But Jinchul interrupted. He stood up, shaky but determined. He said they couldn't just hide him. The world had seen him. The media had footage. Foreign governments were already calling. If they hid him, it would look like the Korean Association was hoarding a secret weapon. They needed to control him publicly. They needed to make him a hunter. If he was part of the system, maybe the glitches would stop. Jinwoo looked at Jinchul. He thought it was a risky gamble. If the system rejected him again, more people would die. Jinchul argued that they had no choice. The United States was demanding an explanation for the American national who fell from the sky. If they didn't legitimize him, there would be political war. Jinwoo looked at Wade. He asked Wade if he wanted to be a hero. Wade laughed, a deep, rasping laugh. He said he was no hero. He was just a guy who couldn't keep his mouth shut. But he needed money. He needed tacos. And he needed a tailor. He agreed to join. Go Gun-hee stood up. He looked at the destruction of his office. He looked at the blood on the carpet. He made a decision. He would authorize a special license. Wade would be the first S-rank hunter with a 0 mana. A new class would be created. They would call it irregular. But there were conditions. Wade would be under 24-hour surveillance by the monitoring division. And if he stepped out of line, if he caused another glitch, Jinwoo would personally throw him into the gap between dimensions, alive or not. Wade saluted. He said it was a deal. He asked for a cash advance. Jinchul sighed and rubbed his temples. The headache was just beginning. The immediate crisis was over, but the cost was high. 7 hunters were dead. 20 were injured. The headquarters was compromised, and the system was now hostile. The blue boxes that hunters relied on were flickering across the city. The trust in the absolute power of the system had been shaken. Jinwoo dismissed his shadow soldiers. He walked to the window and looked out at the city. He could feel the eyes of the monarchs watching from the darkness. They had seen the administrator manifest. They knew something was wrong with the architect's design. Wade was not just a nuisance. He was a wild card that could ruin everyone's plans. Jinwoo knew that the Antares, the Dragon Monarch, would not ignore this. War was coming, and now they had a chaotic element in the middle of the battlefield. Wade walked over to Jinchul and poked him on the shoulder. He asked if Jinchul wanted to get a drink. Jinchul looked at the blood-soaked maniac. He looked at the severed ear growing back on the side of Wade's head. He looked at the madness in those white eyes. Jinchul adjusted his glasses. He said yes. He needed a drink, a strong one. They left the office. The clean-up crews were already arriving. They looked at Wade with fear. He was a monster to them, a thing that broke the world. Wade didn't care. He was used to being the monster. He walked with a bounce in his step, despite his injuries. He hummed a pop song. He was trapped in a world of serious faces and magic rules. He decided he was going to break every single one of them. The era of the irregular had begun. The system watched him go, its code rewriting itself, planning the next attempt, calculating the next catastrophe. The peace was over. The glitch was permanent. 2 weeks had passed since the incident at the association headquarters. The world had changed, but it tried to pretend it was normal. The news channels played clips of the man in the red suit 24 hours a day. They called him the zombie hunter. Merchandise was already being sold in the streets of Seoul. Kids wore red masks, but inside the high-level hunter circles, there was no celebration. There was only fear. The system, the invisible force that gave hunters their power and their jobs, was acting strange. Gates were opening slightly off schedule. Blue text boxes flickered and showed wrong numbers. Hunters reported headaches when they used too much mana. It was like a computer virus was spreading through the laws of physics. Wade Wilson sat in a reinforced waiting room. He was bored. He was sharpening his swords on the edge of a metal table. The association had given him new gear. His suit was patched with high-grade monster leather. It was tougher than Kevlar. He had 2 new swords made of processed magic steel. They were sharp enough to cut a tank in half. But Wade missed his old guns. The association refused to give him firearms. They said it was too dangerous. Wade thought that was funny because he was the most dangerous thing in the room, with or without a gun. The door opened and Woo Jinchul walked in. He looked more tired than usual. He had dark circles under his eyes. He told Wade it was time. Today was the test. To prove that the zombie hunter was an asset and not a curse, Wade had to join a major raid. The Hunters Guild, the most powerful guild in Korea, was taking on a massive A-rank gate that had appeared near Incheon. It was a high-stakes mission. Choi Jong-in, the leader of the Hunters Guild, had agreed to take Wade along, but it was not a friendly offer. It was a government order. Jinchul warned Wade to follow orders. If he went off script, the association would not help him. Wade saluted mockingly and followed Jinchul out to the transport trucks. The staging area near the gate was crowded. Reporters were held back by police lines. Tanks and healers were checking their equipment. When Wade stepped out of the truck, the noise stopped. Every hunter turned to look at him. They stared at the red suit. They could feel the lack of mana. To their senses, he was just a normal person. It felt wrong for a normal person to stand among giants. Cha Hai-in was there too. She was the vice guild master. She walked over to Wade. She held a handkerchief over her nose. She had a sensitive sense of smell for mana. Usually, hunters smelled good or neutral. Monsters smelled bad. Wade smelled like old blood and burnt chemicals. She told him to stay behind the tanks and not to interfere unless necessary. Wade winked at her, which she couldn't see behind his mask, and told her he loved a woman in uniform. She ignored him and walked away. The gate was huge. It was a swirling vortex of red and black energy. It looked unstable. Choi Jong-in stood at the front. He adjusted his glasses. He was a master of fire magic. He gave a speech to his team. He told them to stay focused. He did not mention Wade. He wanted to pretend the red clown was not there. The signal was given. The raid team, 50 elite hunters, marched into the dungeon. Wade walked at the back, whistling a tune. Inside the gate, the world shifted. Usually, a dungeon looked like a cave or a forest. This place looked like a ruined city, but it was not a normal city. The buildings were made of grey blocks without textures. The sky was a flat white colour. Trees were just floating green triangles. It looked like a video game that had not finished loading. The hunters were confused. They tapped their headsets. Radios were dead. The healers tried to summon their light spirits, but the spirits flickered and vanished. A sense of dread settled over the group. This was a glitch dungeon. The system was struggling to render the environment because Wade was inside it. They walked down the empty grey street. Suddenly, the ground rumbled. Not from below, but from the air. The white sky cracked. Red text appeared in the sky, huge and menacing. It said, "Warning, foreign data detected. Initiating purge." The hunters read the words in horror. They had never seen the system speak directly like this. Choi Jong-in shouted for a defensive formation. The tanks slammed their shields down. The mages charged their spells. From the cracks in the sky, monsters fell. They were not goblins or orcs. They were shapes that kept changing. 1 second they looked like wolves. The next second they looked like jagged spikes of metal. They roared, but the sound was like static noise. They charged the hunters. Choi unleashed a wall of fire. The fire hit the monsters, but instead of burning them, the fire turned into blue pixels and disappeared. The monsters were immune to magic. The mages panicked. Their strongest attacks were being deleted upon impact. A shifting wolf monster leaped over the shield wall. It landed on a healer. The healer screamed as the monster bit down. But it didn't tear flesh. It drained color. The healer turned grey and fell silent. The monster grew bigger. It was eating their existence. Wade saw this. He realized that the rules of this dungeon were designed to kill magic users, and he was the only one without magic. He drew his swords. He shouted at the hunters to get back. He ran forward. Wade moved with a speed that defied logic. He slid under the legs of a tank and slashed at the wolf monster. His sword connected. It was physical steel hitting physical form. The monster screeched. It bled black data. Wade laughed. He yelled that he finally found a game he was good at. He spun and chopped the monster's head off. The monster dissolved into code. Wade stood up and looked at the terrified hunters. He told them that their magic tricks wouldn't work here. This was a physical server. They needed to hit things. The raid turned into a chaotic brawl. The mages, useless without their spells, had to use their staffs as clubs. The tanks used their shields as battering rams. Wade was everywhere. He was a whirlwind of red and silver. He took hits that would kill a normal man. A spike monster stabbed him through the chest. Wade just pushed himself deeper onto the spike so he could get close enough to stab the monster in the eye. He pulled the spike out of his own chest and used it as a weapon. The hunters watched in disgust and awe. It was brutal. It was messy. It was effective. They pushed forward, deeper into the grey city. They needed to find the boss to close the gate. The fighting was taking a toll. Wade was slowing down. His healing factor was working overtime, but he was getting tired. He was hungry. He complained loudly about the lack of vending machines. Cha Hai-in fought beside him. She used her sword with incredible skill. She was the only one who could keep up with Wade. She noticed that the monsters seemed to focus on him. They wanted to erase him. She realized that the dungeon was a trap specifically for him, and they were all just collateral damage. They reached the center of the city. There was a massive plaza. In the center stood the boss. It was a giant knight, but it was missing its textures. It was a purple wireframe model. It held a sword that looked like a hole in reality. It was pure blackness. If that sword hit you, you wouldn't bleed. You would just cease to exist. The boss looked at the hunters. It raised its hand. A wave of pressure knocked everyone to the ground. Everyone except Wade. Wade stood his ground. His boots slid on the pavement. He looked at the wireframe knight. He knew this was the executioner. The system had sent a moderator to ban him. Wade cracked his neck. He walked forward alone. Choi Jong-in tried to stop him, but Cha Hai-in held him back. She shook her head. She knew they couldn't fight this thing. Their magic was poison here. Only the anomaly could fight the anomaly. The boss swung the black sword. Wade dodged. The sword hit a building behind him. The building didn't crumble. It just vanished. It was deleted from history. Wade gulped. That was close. He ran at the boss. He slashed at its legs. The sword bounced off the wireframe. It was hard as diamond. The boss kicked Wade. Wade flew across the plaza and smashed into a statue. His spine snapped. He lay there twisted. The boss walked towards him, raising the black sword for a finishing blow. Wade looked up. He saw the sword coming. He knew he couldn't heal from deletion. If that sword hit him, he was gone for good. No sequel, no reboot. He reached into his belt. He pulled out a grenade. It was a standard military grenade he had stolen from the truck earlier. He pulled the pin. He didn't throw it at the boss. He shoved it into his own mouth. He bit down on the spoon. The boss swung the sword. At the last second, Wade rolled forward, right between the boss's legs. The grenade exploded. Wade's head exploded. But the force of the explosion inside the wireframe model disrupted its code. The boss glitched. It froze. Its sword stopped inches from the ground. Wade's body lay headless on the ground. The hunters screamed. They thought he was dead. They thought it was over. But then, the neck stump bubbled. Bone grew white and fast. Muscle wove itself like red yarn. Skin covered the muscle. A mouth formed. Then a nose. Then eyes. Wade gasped for air. He had regrown his head. It took 10 seconds. It was the most horrifying thing any of the hunters had ever seen. A healer vomited in the corner. Wade touched his face. He checked if his nose was straight. He looked at the frozen boss. The grenade had disrupted the connection. The boss was buffering. Wade saw his chance. He climbed up the boss's leg. He climbed like a spider. He reached the chest cavity where a glowing red core pulsed. He took both his swords. He plunged them into the red core. He twisted them. He yelled a war cry that sounded like a laugh. The core cracked. The wireframe knight shrieked. It was a sound of digital agony. The purple lines shattered. The boss exploded into a shower of white numbers. The dungeon began to collapse. The grey buildings melted. The sky turned black. The exit gate appeared. Choi Jong-in shouted for everyone to run. They sprinted towards the blue light. Wade was the last one. He walked slowly. He picked up his severed ear that had been blown off earlier and put it in his pocket. He walked through the gate just as the dungeon deleted itself completely. Outside, in the real world, it was night. The hunters collapsed on the ground. They were alive, but they were changed. They had seen the other side of the curtain. They knew their powers were just software, and software could be broken. The medical team rushed in. They treated the wounds, but one of the A-rank mages was sitting silently. A medic tried to heal a cut on his arm, but the magic wouldn't work. The mage looked at his hands. He tried to summon a flame. Nothing happened. He tried again. Nothing. He started to cry. The dungeon had not killed him, but it had stripped his ID. He was no longer a hunter. He was an empty shell. Wade sat on the bumper of an ambulance. He was eating a sandwich he found in a bag. Jinchul walked over to him. Jinchul looked at the crying mage. He looked at the terrified faces of the elite hunters. Then he looked at Wade. Jinchul was angry. He grabbed Wade by the collar of his suit. He hissed at him. He asked if Wade knew what he had done. Wade swallowed a bite of the sandwich. He said he saved the day. He killed the boss. He got the loot. Jinchul let him go and shoved him back. He pointed at the mage who had lost his powers. He told Wade that this was the cost. The system was punishing them for associating with him. Every time Wade fought, the system broke a little more. Innocents were paying the price. Wade looked at the mage. For a second, the humor left his eyes. He looked sad. He understood. He was radioactive. Just being near him was dangerous for these people. A black car pulled up. The window rolled down. It was Jinwoo Sung. He had been watching from the shadows, but now he made his presence known. He signaled for Wade to get in. Wade grabbed his sandwich and hopped into the car. The car drove away, leaving the confused and traumatized Hunters Guild behind. Inside the car, it was quiet. Jinwoo drove. He looked straight ahead. He spoke without looking at Wade. He said that the monarchs were moving. They had sensed the instability. They were planning to attack sooner than expected. They wanted to use the chaos Wade caused to wipe out humanity. Jinwoo said he had a plan, but it required Wade to do something difficult. Wade asked what it was. He asked if he had to wear a dress. Jinwoo did not laugh. He said that Wade had to go to the source. He had to enter a red gate, a gate that was disconnected from the system, and stay there until Jinwoo could fix the architect's code. It was exile, solitary confinement in a world of monsters. Wade looked out the window at the passing city lights. He saw a family walking on the sidewalk. He saw a kid with a Deadpool mask. Wade sighed. He knew he was bad for this world. He was a comic book character in a serious novel. He was ruining the plot. Wade agreed. He said he would go, but he had one condition. He wanted a pizza, a really big pizza with everything on it. Jinwoo nodded. He said he would buy the pizza. They arrived at a secluded location in the mountains. A red gate was open. It was a B-rank gate, but it was isolated. Jinwoo stopped the car. He handed Wade a stack of pizza boxes. Wade stepped out. The air was cold. The gate swirled with ominous red energy. Wade turned to Jinwoo. He asked if Jinwoo would come to visit. Jinwoo said he would try. Wade adjusted his mask. He drew his swords. He walked towards the red light. Suddenly, a beam of purple light shot down from the sky. It hit the ground between Wade and the gate. The ground exploded. A figure stepped out of the smoke. It was not a monster. It was a man. He had long white hair and dragon-like eyes. He wore armor made of red scales. It was Antares, the Dragon Monarch. The king of dragons had descended. He ignored Jinwoo. He looked directly at Wade. Antares smiled. It was a cruel smile. He spoke with a voice that sounded like a volcano erupting. He said he had been looking for the outsider. He said that Wade smelled like a different dimension. a dimension where death was optional. Antares found that fascinating. He wanted to study it. He wanted to rip Wade apart piece by piece and see what made him tick. Jinwoo stepped out of the car. He transformed. His black armor covered him. The purple aura of the Shadow Monarch flared up, turning the night sky blacker. He stood between Wade and Antares. Jinwoo told Wade to run into the gate. Now. Wade didn't argue. He knew when he was outclassed. He sprinted for the red gate. Antares laughed. He breathed in. Mana gathered in his throat. He unleashed a breath of dragon fire. The fire was not normal fire. It was the breath of destruction. It could burn anything, even shadows. Jinwoo raised a wall of shadow soldiers to block it. The wall held for a second, then vaporized. The fire rushed towards Wade. Wade jumped. He dove into the red gate just as the fire licked his heels. The heat burned the soles of his boots off. He tumbled into the red void. The gate closed behind him, sealing him inside. Outside, the fire hit the closed gate and dissipated. Antares stopped breathing fire. He looked at Jinwoo. He looked disappointed. He said the toy had run away. But it didn't matter. He would burn this world to find him again. Jinwoo summoned Igris and Baru. The two monarchs stood facing each other. The war had started, and Wade was locked in a box, alone, in a hostile dimension, with no way out and only a pizza for comfort. Inside the red gate, Wade landed in snow. It was a frozen wasteland, a tundra. The wind howled. It was -40 degrees. The pizza boxes were scattered in the snow. Wade gathered them up quickly. He sat on a rock. He opened a box. The cheese was already freezing. He took a bite of cold pizza. He looked at the white horizon. He saw shadows moving in the blizzard. Ice bears, huge ones, hundreds of them. They smelled the pepperoni. They smelled the fresh meat. Wade chewed his pizza. He swallowed. He stood up. He had no guns. His swords were chipped. He was alone in a frozen hell. He smiled under his mask. This was just like a Tuesday. He yelled at the bears to come and get a slice. The bears roared and charged. Wade ran to meet them. The chain reaction had begun. The world outside was at war because of him. And he was at war with a planet of ice bears. The escalation was complete. There was no going back now. The story was hurtling towards a crash, and Wade was driving the bus with no brakes. Time lost its meaning inside the red gate. To the outside world, it had been 3 days. To Wade Wilson, it had been 6 months. The frozen wasteland was a white hell that stretched endlessly in every direction. The wind did not just blow. It stripped flesh from bone. The temperature was so low that even Wade's accelerated healing struggled to keep up. His skin would freeze, crack, turn black, and slough off, only to be replaced by raw pink tissue that froze again minutes later. He was a cycle of decay and rebirth, trapped in a snow globe shaken by a sadistic child. The pizza was gone in the first hour. The boxes were used as kindling for a fire that lasted 10 minutes. Now, Wade wore the skins of 50 ice bears. He looked like a savage beast, a yeti of red spandex and white fur. He sat on a throne made of frozen bear skulls in the middle of a valley he had cleared of life. He was bored. The boredom was worse than the torture. In the beginning, the constant fighting was fun. The ice bears were strong, B-rank monsters that could crush a tank. Wade had to learn their patterns. He had to be faster. He had to be more brutal. He broke his swords on the 3rd day. He replaced them with thigh bones sharpened on rocks. He fought with a primal savagery that stripped away the tactical soldier and left only the madman. But eventually, the bears stopped coming. They learned fear. The local ecosystem, programmed to be a relentless gauntlet, had broken. The monsters hid from the intruder. The dungeon was designed to kill intruders, not to host a predator who refused to die. The logic of the instance was failing. The snow stopped falling in certain areas, leaving jagged patches of black void. The sky flickered like a broken fluorescent bulb. Wade stood up from his bone throne. He held a skull in his hand. He had named it Logan. He talked to it constantly. He argued with it about the ethics of killing fictional animals. Logan was a good listener, mostly because he lacked a lower jaw. Wade decided it was time to move. He had explored the north, the east, and the west. He had found nothing but ice and scared bears. Today, he would go south. He would walk until he hit the invisible wall that marked the boundary of the game map. He wanted to see what the texture of nothingness felt like. He strapped the bone swords to his back and began to trudge through the deep snow. Outside the gate, the world was holding its breath. The war had not started with a bang, but with a slow, suffocating pressure. Jinwoo Song stood on the roof of the Daesung Tower. He looked out over Seoul. The city was dark. The power grid had failed 2 hours ago, not because of a monster attack, but because of the atmospheric mana density. The presence of the monarchs was leaking into the world, interfering with electronics. People were huddled in their homes, terrified. The Hunter Association was in shambles. The loss of mana that had started with a few mages was spreading. Every hour, another report came in. A B-rank healer suddenly unable to cast. An A-rank striker whose punches lost their impact. The system was diverting resources. It was pulling mana away from the hunters to reinforce the dimensional walls that Wade had cracked. Jinwoo felt the strain. He was the Shadow Monarch, independent of the system's mana distribution, so he was unaffected. But his soldiers were uneasy. Beru, the Ant King, chattered nervously in the shadows. He sensed the approach of the Dragon Monarch Antares. The enemy was not attacking yet. Antares was waiting. He was watching the humans get weaker. He knew that the system was destroying itself to contain the anomaly. It was a perfect strategy. Let the enemy's immune system kill the host, then walk in and claim the corpse. Jinwoo knew he had to finish this quickly, but he couldn't enter the Red Gate to retrieve Wade without leaving Seoul defenseless. He was trapped in a stalemate. Back inside the frozen hell, Wade reached the edge of the world. It was not a subtle barrier. It was a literal wall of static. The snow stopped abruptly, cutting off in a straight line. Beyond the line was a swirling grey mist of unfinished data. Wade poked the wall. His finger tingled. It felt like licking a battery. He chuckled. He pressed his face against the static. He could see faint shapes on the other side, wireframes, geometry, the backstage of reality. A normal person would have turned back. A normal hunter would have been terrified. But Wade saw a door where there was none. He saw a challenge. He drew his bone swords. He jammed them into the static wall. Sparks of blue and red light flew. The wall hummed aggressively. A system message appeared in the air, glowing red. Warning, boundary violation. Turn back. Wade ignored it. He carved a slit in the fabric of the dungeon. He pried it open with his hands. His muscles tore, his bones creaked, but he pushed. He wanted to see the manager. He wanted to file a complaint about the lack of chimichangas. With a wet, tearing sound, the wall ripped. A hole large enough for a man appeared. It led into a tunnel of streaming code. Wade stepped through. This was the small choice. He could have stayed in the ice. He could have waited for Jinwoo. But he chose curiosity. He chose to break the rules because following them was boring. He stepped out of the physical space of the Red Gate and into the data stream that connected the dungeons to the system. He was now a physical virus in the bloodstream of the world's magic. The tunnel was disorienting. Numbers flew past him like bullets. He saw images of other dungeons. He saw a desert with giant centipedes. He saw a jungle with high orcs. He saw a castle with demons. He was seeing the feed of the system. He floated through the stream, swimming in the data. He felt a pull, a gravity. It was drawing him toward the center, toward the core. He let it take him. He landed on a platform made of obsidian. In front of him stood a massive pillar of blue light. It was the central processing unit of the system. It was the construct the architect had built to manage the Shadow Monarch's succession. Wade walked up to the pillar. It was beautiful. It hummed with the voices of millions of hunters. He could hear their commands. Fireball, stealth, heal. The system processed their requests and granted them mana. It was a god made of math. Wade reached out his hand. He didn't want to destroy it. He just wanted to touch it. He wanted to leave his mark. He took a marker from his utility belt, a marker that shouldn't have existed, but did because he believed it did, and wrote, "Wade was here on the pillar of light." The moment the ink touched the light, the hum stopped. The pillar turned red. A shockwave blasted Wade backward. He tumbled across the obsidian platform. The system had detected a direct contamination of its core executable. It didn't know how to process graffiti. It didn't know how to process Wade's chaotic signature directly on its brain. It panicked. The system calculated that the corruption was total. To save the integrity of the dimensional boundaries, it had to purge the infected user base. It initiated a hard reset. In Seoul, the disaster happened instantly. Every hunter, from the lowest E rank to the highest S rank, froze. Their blue status windows appeared in front of them without being summoned. But the windows were not blue. They were flashing crimson. The text was bold and terrifying. Critical error. Connection lost. System reset initiated. Mana access revoked. Cha Hai-in was patrolling the streets with the Hunters Guild. She saw the message. She felt a sudden emptiness in her chest. The mana that flowed through her veins, making her faster, stronger, and more durable, simply evaporated. It was like the air was sucked out of her lungs. She fell to her knees, gasping. Her sword, which was summoned from her inventory, flickered and disappeared. She was just a woman in a trench coat now. Around her, the other hunters collapsed. The tank, whose shield was holding back a feral wolf that had escaped a minor gate, watched his shield vanish. The wolf lunged. The tank screamed, raising his bare arms. The wolf tore into him. He died not as a hunter, but as prey. Panic erupted. The strength that humanity relied on was gone. The S-rank hunters, who were treated like gods, were suddenly mortal. Choi Jong-in tried to conjure a flame to light the darkness. He snapped his fingers. Nothing happened. He stared at his hand in disbelief. He was the ultimate soldier of flame, and now he couldn't even light a candle. The fear in his eyes was absolute. Without mana, they were defenseless against the monsters that were still pouring out of the unsealed gates. The gates did not close. The system's lock on them failed. Every dungeon in the world opened at once. Jinwoo felt the shift. He fell to one knee on the roof. The connection to the system was severed for him too. But unlike the others, his power came from the Shadow Monarch, Ashbourne. He did not need the system to access his power. The system was just a tutorial interface. When the interface crashed, his power remained, but his control faltered. His shadow soldiers flickered. The limitationers were gone. His true power, vast and terrifying, flooded his body. He screamed in pain as the death energy threatened to tear his human vessel apart. He had to struggle to contain it. He looked down at the streets. He saw the slaughter beginning. Hunters were being butchered by goblins and orcs they would have normally swatted like flies. Jinwoo tried to command his army to save them. "Protect the humans," he roared. His voice carried a magical weight that cracked the concrete of the roof. The shadow soldiers stabilized. They spread out, a black tide moving to intercept the monsters. But there were too many gates, and the hunters, who usually acted as the first line of defense, were now liabilities. They were running, clogging the streets, screaming for help that couldn't come. High above the chaos, a rift opened in the sky. It was the exit of the data stream. Wade Wilson fell out of the hole. He plummeted through the clouds, screaming in excitement. He crashed into the Han River. He sank to the bottom, then swam up, gasping for air. He dragged himself onto the muddy bank. He looked at the city. It was burning, not just a few fires. The whole skyline was ablaze. Monsters were swarming the bridges. He saw a giant serpent wrapped around the Seoul Tower. He saw wyverns picking people off the highways. Wade stood up and wrung out his suit. He looked at the red text boxes that were still floating in the air above dead hunters. He read the Manhwa access revoked message. He put his hands on his head. "Oops," he whispered. He didn't mean to turn off the internet. He just wanted to sign the guest book. He realized the scale of his mistake. He had disarmed the world in the middle of a war. A shadow fell over him. He turned around. Standing there was Thomas Andre, the Goliath, the national-level hunter from America. But Thomas looked small. His massive muscles were still there, but the golden aura of the ruler's vessel was gone. He was bleeding from a wound on his forehead. He held a piece of rebar like a club. He looked at Wade with pure hatred. Thomas had traveled to Korea to help, and now he was powerless. He recognized the red suit. He knew who was responsible. "You," Thomas growled. He swung the rebar. It was a heavy blow, but it was a human blow. Wade caught it. He didn't even flinch. Without mana, Thomas Andre was just a very strong bodybuilder. Wade, on the other hand, was a biology experiment gone wrong. His strength didn't come from the system. It came from mutation. Wade pushed Thomas back. Thomas stumbled. The look of humiliation on the Goliath's face was painful to watch. He was a king stripped of his crown. "Go home, Goliath," Wade said, his voice unusually serious. "This isn't your fight anymore. You'll die." Thomas roared and charged again. He couldn't accept it. He was a national-level hunter. He was a tank. He didn't run. Wade sighed. He drew his bone sword. He didn't want to kill him. He stepped inside Thomas's guard and punched him in the solar plexus. Thomas crumpled. He gasped for air, unable to stand. Wade looked down at him. "I'm sorry," Wade said. "I really am. I thought it was a game. I didn't know the save file was corrupted." Wade turned away from the fallen hero. He looked towards the center of the city, where the fighting was fiercest. He saw a pillar of purple darkness rising. Jinwoo was there, and approaching him from the north was a storm of fire. Antares, the Dragon Monarch, was making his move. He knew the system was down. He knew the rulers could not intervene through their vessels anymore because the vessels were broken. It was just him and the Shadow Monarch now. Wade started running. He ran past the fleeing civilians. He ran past the looting goblins, decapitating them as he went. He had to fix this. He didn't know how, but he had to try. He was the only one besides Jinwoo who still had powers. He was the wild card, the Joker, and the Joker had to play the final hand. As he ran, he felt a strange sensation. The system, in its dying throes, was trying to latch onto something. It was looking for a host. It couldn't connect to the hunters. It couldn't connect to the core. So it looked for the thing that broke it. blue code began to bleed into Wade's vision. It wasn't the clean blue of before. It was jagged, static-filled code. New admin detected. Searching for compatible avatar. Target, Deadpool. Warning, target is insane. Override, no other options. Wade stumbled. His head felt like it was splitting open. The system was trying to download itself into his brain. It was desperate. It needed a server. And Wade's brain, with its regenerating neurons and chaotic pathways, was the only thing robust enough to hold the fragmented data. He screamed as knowledge flooded him. He saw the location of every gate. He saw the stats of every monster. He saw the cooldown timers of skills that no longer worked. He was becoming the interface. He fell to his knees in the middle of a bridge. A group of orcs surrounded him. They raised their axes. Wade looked up. His eyes were glowing, not with mana, but with scrolling binary code. He grinned. "Okay," he said to the voices in his head. "Let's reboot this sucker." He stood up. The system integration gave him unauthorized access to the world's physics engine. He looked at the orcs. He pointed a finger. "Delete," he said. The orcs didn't die. They just popped out of existence. No blood, no bodies, just gone. Wade looked at his hand. He laughed. It was a godlike power, but it came with a cost. Every time he used it, he felt a piece of his memory disappear. He forgot the name of his favorite movie. He forgot the taste of tacos. The system was overwriting Wade Wilson to make room for its own survival. He had to reach Jinwoo before he wiped himself completely. He sprinted towards the purple pillar. In the city center, Jinwoo was fighting a losing battle. He was strong, but he was overwhelmed. Antares had arrived in his human form, but his presence was suffocating. Behind Antares, the army of destruction marched. Thousands of dragons, drakes, and draconians. Jinwoo's shadow army was vast, but without the support of the hunters, without the healers to keep the civilians alive, Jinwoo had to divide his attention. He was protecting millions while fighting a god. Antares laughed as he blasted a shadow giant into oblivion. "The architect failed," he bellowed. "The barrier is gone. This world is mine." Jinwoo panted, clutching his daggers. He was exhausted. The death energy was corrosive. He looked up and saw a red streak moving through the battlefield. It was Wade, but he looked different. He was glowing with a glitchy blue aura. He was moving through objects, phasing like a ghost. Wade reached the clearing where the monarch stood. He stopped. He looked at Antares. "Hey, Scaly," Wade shouted. His voice was distorted, sounding like two people talking at once. "You're trespassing on private property." Antares looked at Wade. He narrowed his eyes. "The anomaly," he sneered. "You broke the lock. I should thank you." "You're welcome," Wade said. He twitched. He forgot his mother's name. "Now get off my lawn." Wade clapped his hands. He tried to use the delete command on Antares. The air distorted around the Dragon Monarch. Antares frowned. He felt a tug on his existence, but he was too strong. He was a higher dimensional being. The system could not delete a monarch. The command failed. Antares raised his hand. "You are annoying." A blast of dragon fire consumed Wade. It was the same fire that had chased him into the gate. But this time, Wade didn't run. He stood in the fire. His suit burned away. His skin burned away. But the blue code held his skeleton together. The system was actively repairing him faster than the destruction could erase him. It was a stalemate of infinite calculation. Wade walked out of the fire, a smoking skeleton with glowing blue eyes and a regenerating tongue. "Is that all you got?" Wade rasped. He looked at Jinwoo. "Hey, Shadow Man, I have a plan. It's a stupid plan. You're gonna hate it." Jinwoo stepped closer, deflecting a stray fireball. What is it? I can't kill him. Wade pointed at Antares. He's an admin too. But I can change the server settings. I can bring the mana back. But I have to be the router. I have to plug myself into the gap. Jinwoo understood immediately. Wade was offering to become the living bridge. He would anchor the system within himself, restoring the flow of mana to the hunters. But he would be trapped in the stream forever. He would be a living conduit, unable to move, unable to speak, just processing data for eternity. It was a fate worse than death. You will be erased, Jinwoo said. Your personality, everything. Wade shrugged. One of his eyes popped back into its socket. I'm already forgetting who I am, buddy. I don't remember why I like red. Better to go out as a utility pole than a villain. He didn't wait for permission. Wade turned to the sky. He reached up. He grabbed the fabric of the air as if it were a curtain. He pulled. The sky tore open again. The stream of code was visible. Wade looked at Jinwoo one last time. Tell the author. Wade smiled, half his face still skull, that I demand a retcon in the sequel. Wade jumped. He flew into the tear in the sky. He spread his arms. The code swallowed him. His body dissolved into pure light. He became the current. Instantly, the red windows across the world turned blue. The text changed. System reboot successful. Connection restored. Mana flow normalized. Cha-Hai-In gasped as power flooded back into her veins. Her sword reappeared in her hand. The tank in the street, who was bleeding out, suddenly felt his defensive buff activate. His skin turned to steel. He smashed the wolf that was biting him. Light returned to the eyes of the mages. Choi Jong-in roared, summoning a massive firestorm that incinerated the monsters surrounding him. The hunters were back, and they were angry. Jinwoo felt the burden lift. He no longer had to hold the world together. The system was functioning again. The hunters rallied. They charged the army of destruction with renewed fury. Jinwoo looked at the scar in the sky where Wade had vanished. It was slowly closing. He felt a profound sense of loss. The clown had saved them. The glitch had patched the system. Jinwoo turned to Antares. The Dragon Monarch looked confused. He didn't understand why the humans were standing up again. He didn't understand sacrifice without gain. Jinwoo's eyes burned with a cold, terrifying rage. He raised his hand. The shadow army roared. Now, Jinwoo said, his voice echoing like death itself. You die. The final battle began, not with a whimper, but with the roar of a resurrected world. But high above, in the silent stream of data, a single line of code floated endlessly, drifting through the mana. User, Wade Wilson. Status, connected. Current action, eating virtual chimichanga. It was a lie the system told itself to keep the host. Stable. Wade was gone. Only the outcome remained. The world was saved, and the cost was one madman. The blue light of the restored system flooded the battlefield. It was not just a visual effect. It was a physical wave of energy. The hunters felt it slam into their chests like a restart on a stopped heart. The fear that had paralyzed them vanished, replaced by a surge of adrenaline and mana. Tanks who were cowering behind broken cars stood up. Their shields, which had been heavy pieces of useless metal a moment ago, now glowed with magical barriers. Healers who had been weeping over the injured felt the warmth of light magic return to their fingertips. Wounds began to close. Strength returned to limbs that were ready to give up. The tide of the war had shifted in a single second. Jinwoo Sung did not waste that second. He felt the connection re-establish. The mana of the world was flowing again, but it felt different. It was faster. It was wilder. It tasted like static electricity. It was Wade's mana now. Jinwoo gripped his daggers, Kamish's wrath. The dragon-tooth blades hummed with power. He looked at Antares. The Dragon Monarch was still processing the change. Antares had expected a slaughter of helpless sheep. Instead, the sheep had become wolves again. Jinwoo launched himself forward. He moved so fast that the ground beneath him cracked into powder. He appeared instantly in front of Antares. He slashed diagonally. Antares raised his arm to block. His red scale armor was the hardest substance in the universe. Usually, it would deflect anything. But when Jinwoo's dagger hit the scales, a strange noise echoed. It sounded like a buzzer on a game show. A small red box appeared in the air next to the impact point. It said, "Critical hit." The dagger did not just cut. It tore through the armor as if the defense stat of the Dragon King had been lowered to 0. Antares roared in shock. Blood, hot as lava, sprayed from his arm. He stumbled back. He looked at the wound. It was not healing right. The edges of the cut were pixelated. They were grey and glitchy. The healing magic of the Dragon Monarch was struggling to overwrite the damage caused by the corrupted system. Jinwoo realized what was happening. Wade was not just a passive bridge. He was an active participant. He was inside the machine and he was cheating on Jinwoo's behalf. Jinwoo suppressed a smile. He pressed the attack. The Shadow Army surged forward. Bellion, the Grand Marshal, led the charge. He swung his massive sword, which extended like a whip. He struck a flight of ancient dragons. The dragons tried to breathe fire, but their fire fizzled out into confetti. It was a ridiculous sight. Terrifying beasts opening their maws to destroy the world, only to spray harmless, colourful paper. The dragons were confused. The Shadow soldiers were not. They climbed onto the confused dragons and tore them out of the sky. Antares was furious. This was not war. This was a mockery. He transformed. He abandoned his human form completely. His body expanded, growing larger and larger until he was a mountain of red scales and wings. He became the Dragon of Destruction. His roar shattered the windows of every building in Seoul that was still standing. He prepared his ultimate attack, the Breath of Destruction. It was an attack that could erase everything in its path, burning through dimensions. He aimed it not at Jinwoo, but at the sky. He aimed it at the tear where Wade had vanished. Antares was smart. He knew the source of the madness. If he burned the new core, the system would crash again, and this time it would stay down. The column of fire shot upward. It was a beam of pure annihilation. Jinwoo screamed for his soldiers to intercept it, but they were too small. The beam raced toward the invisible network in the sky. If it hit, Wade would be erased. The consciousness that was holding the world together would die. But just as the fire was about to touch the upper atmosphere, the sky changed color. It turned a bright neon pink. A giant translucent hand made of blue grid lines appeared from the clouds. It was the size of a city. The hand held a giant flat object. It looked like a fly swatter. The fly swatter swung down. It hit the Breath of Destruction. The laws of physics groaned. A beam of energy capable of destroying a planet should not be stopped by a construct that looked like a cartoon prop. But the system defined reality now, and the system thought it was funny. The fly swatter slapped the fire beam back down. The flames exploded outward, washing over the dragon army instead. Thousands of dragonkin were incinerated by their own king's fire. Antares shrieked in rage. The giant hand gave a thumbs up and then dissolved into rain. Jinwoo used the distraction. He grew to his giant size. He summoned the avatar of the Shadow Monarch. A titan of black armor rose to meet the red dragon. They clashed in the center of the burning city. It was a battle of gods. Every punch created a shockwave that flattened city blocks. But the hunters were safe. Wade's system was protecting them. Whenever a building fell toward a group of humans, it would bounce off an invisible rubber wall. Whenever a shockwave hit a shelter, the air would harden and block the impact. It was the ultimate protection spell, cast by a madman who didn't want the audience to leave the show early. Was fighting on the ground. She was leading a group of A-rank hunters against the ground troops of the Dragon Army. She felt stronger than she ever had before. Her sword felt light. She swung at an elite draconian soldier. She expected resistance. Instead, her sword passed through the enemy armor like a laser. A number popped up over the enemy's head. 99999 damage. She blinked. She looked at her hands. She felt a presence in the back of her mind. A whisper. It sounded like Wade. It said, "Buffed you. Go get 'em, Tiger." She didn't question it. She became a whirlwind of death. The hunters realized that the glitches were helping them. The random teleportations always moved them out of the way of attacks. The random item drops were always high-grade potions. They stopped fearing the chaos and started riding it. High above, in the space between dimensions, Wade Wilson was floating. He was not a body anymore. He was a stream of thought. He was watching a million screens at once. He saw the fight. He saw the fire. He saw the girl with the sword. He felt pain, but it was distant. Every time he altered reality, he lost a memory. He had already forgotten his childhood. He had forgotten the name of the girl he loved. He had forgotten why he wore a mask. He was becoming pure data. But he held on to one thing. He held on to the idea of being the hero. For once, he wasn't the joke. He was the punchline that saved the world. He saw Antares trying to claw his way up to the sky again. Wade focused. He searched the database of the system. He found the file labeled Gravity. He selected the area around Antares. He typed in a new value. He multiplied it by 10,000. On the battlefield, Antares suddenly slammed into the ground. The earth caved in. A crater formed deep and dark. The Dragon King struggled to lift his head. His wings were pinned to the floor by his own weight. He roared a curse at the sky. He knew who was doing this. He shouted that this was cheating. He shouted that a warrior should face him with honor. Jinwoo landed on the edge of the crater. He looked down at the trapped dragon. He held his dagger. He did not care about honor. He cared about survival. "The rules have changed," Jinwoo said. His voice was amplified by the shadows. "You are not fighting a hunter. You are fighting the world." Jinwoo jumped into the pit. He landed on Antares' back. He drove his dagger into the dragon's neck. Antares thrashed. He tried to use his spatial magic to escape, to teleport away, but the destination file was not found. Wade had locked the doors. There was no escape. This was a cage match, and the dragon was locked in with the butcher. Jinwoo stabbed again and again. Black blood filled the crater. The shadow soldiers swarmed over the edge, biting and tearing at the dragon's scales. It was a gruesome end for the monarch of destruction. He was not defeated in a glorious duel. He was mobbed. He was debuffed. He was executed. With a final gargantuan shudder, Antares stopped moving. His body began to turn into grey ash. The mana stone inside him, the heart of a dragon, shattered. A massive notification appeared in the sky, spanning the entire horizon. It was written in Comic Sans font. It said, "Game over. Player 1 wins." The Dragon Army, seeing their king fall, broke. They lost their will to fight. They tried to flee back into the gates, but the gates were closing. The system was sealing the breaches. The remaining monsters were hunted down by the empowered humans. It took hours, but the noise of battle slowly faded. The roaring of dragons was replaced by the cheering of humans. It was a sound of relief, of disbelief. They had survived the apocalypse. Jinwoo stood in the crater. He was back in his human size. He was covered in black dragon blood. He was exhausted. He felt the connection to the system shift again. The intense, manic energy that Wade had provided was settling down. It was becoming a low, steady hum. The immediate danger was over. The combat mode of the system was deactivating. Jinwoo looked up at the sky. The pink clouds were fading, returning to a natural grey. He spoke to the air. "Wade?" There was no answer. No voice in his head. No text box. Jinwoo closed his eyes. He reached out with his senses. He tried to find the chaotic presence he had felt earlier. He found it, but it was spread thin. It was in the wind. It was in the mana lamps on the street. It was in the dungeons. Wade had dissolved. He had become the atmosphere. He was no longer a consciousness that could hold a conversation. He was the operating system. Jinwoo walked out of the crater. The other hunters gathered around him. Thomas Andre, limping but alive, walked up. Choi Jong-in, Cha Hai-in, Park Yun-ho, the leaders of the hunter world. They were battered, bruised, but standing. They looked at Jinwoo. They knew he had done something impossible. But they also looked at the sky. They knew someone else had paid the price. "Is he gone?" Cha Hai-in asked softly. She touched the hilt of her sword. She remembered the voice that had encouraged her. Jinwoo shook his head. "No, he is not gone. He is everything now." The recovery began immediately. The system, under its new management, was efficient. Gates that appeared were quickly identified. Hunters who entered dungeons found the loot drop rates had increased. The gold collected from monsters was worth more. It was as if the game had been patched to be more player-friendly. But there were side effects. Strange things happened. Sometimes, a goblin would dance before attacking. Sometimes, a potion would taste like spicy tacos. Sometimes, the blue status window would show a random fact about a movie from the 1980s. The world learned to live with it. They called it the Wilson effect. It was a reminder that the force protecting them had a sense of humor. Jinwoo did not celebrate. He went back to the spot where the red gate had been. The mountains were quiet. The snow was melting. He sat on a rock. He thought about the man in the red suit, a man who had no place in this world, a man who was a mistake. But that mistake had been the only thing that fit in the whole in reality. Jinwoo realized that the architect had designed a perfect system for a perfect monarch. But the world was imperfect. It needed chaos to survive order. A week later, the Hunter Association held a memorial. It was not for the thousands who died in the war, though they were honored too. It was a special ceremony for the unknown hero. They unveiled the statue in the center of the reconstructed plaza. It was a statue of Wade Wilson. But because the sculptor had never seen Wade's face, and Wade's suit was always torn, the statue looked a bit abstract. It was a figure with two swords and a mask, giving a thumbs up. Jinwoo attended the ceremony from the shadows. He listened to the speeches. The chairman praised the sacrifice of the foreign hunter. The people clapped. They didn't know his name was Wade. They didn't know he was a mercenary. They just knew he was the Red Savior. Jinwoo thought Wade would have hated the speeches. He would have wanted loud music and fireworks. As the ceremony ended, Jinwoo turned to leave. He walked down a quiet alleyway. Suddenly, a blue window popped up in front of him. Jinwoo stopped. He looked at it. It was a system message, but it wasn't a quest. It wasn't a level up. It was a text file. Oh, from admin to Shadow Monarch. Message. Hey, it's dark in here and quiet. I think I'm the wallpaper now. Pretty cool, right? Listen, don't let them make me boring. If that statue doesn't have a grenade in its pocket, I'm haunting you. Also, I left a back door in the code for you. Check your inventory. Level 99 pizza, unlimited. You're welcome. See you in the sequel, big guy. Jinwoo stared at the message. A small, genuine smile broke across his face. He checked his inventory. There, in the first slot, was an item icon. A slice of pepperoni pizza. It glowed with legendary tear light. Description: the perfect slice. Restores full health and dignity. Jinwoo closed the window. He looked up at the blue sky above the alley. The clouds were drifting in the shape of a smiley face. It was subtle, but it was there. Goodbye, Wade, Jinwoo said. He stepped into the shadows and vanished. The world kept turning. The hunters kept hunting. The monsters kept spawning. But the fear was gone. Humanity knew that the system was no longer a cold, unfeeling machine. It was a guardian that was a little bit crazy, a little bit broken, but entirely on their side. In the deepest part of the server, in the sea of binary and mana, a single spark of red light floated. It drifted through the currents of magic. It didn't have a body. It didn't have a voice. But if you listened very closely to the hum of the magic gates, you could almost hear it humming a tune. A pop song from another dimension, echoing forever in the heart of the world. The story of the disruption was over. The story of the new world had just begun. And in this world, even the glitches were part of the plan. The timeline was scarred, but it was stable. And somewhere, in the data, the Deadpool was still laughing. 3 years have passed since the Dragon Monarch fell, and the sky turned pink. The world has rebuilt itself, but the scars of the war remain visible in the architecture and the culture. The most significant change, however, is not in the buildings but in the air itself. The global mana density has stabilized, yet it carries a peculiar frequency. Scientists call it the Omega variance. Hunters call it the Wilson effect. The system, once a cold and impartial calculator of strength, has developed a personality. It is not uncommon for a hunter to receive a quest notification that includes sarcasm or pop culture references from a century ago. The rewards for clearing dungeons have shifted. Alongside magic stones and gold, chests sometimes contain items that defy explanation, like infinite ammo clips for guns that do not exist, or potions that taste like carbonated sugar water. The Hunter Association has created a new department dedicated solely to interpreting these anomalies. They treat the system as a living entity, one that requires appeasement. Offerings are left at the base of the red phantom statues that stand in major cities. People leave chimichangas and action figures hoping for better drop rates. It sounds like superstition, but statistics show that regions with higher offerings see fewer dungeon breaks. The chaos has become a form of order. The logic of the world has been rewritten by a madman, and surprisingly, it works better than the cold perfection of the architect. The survival rate of low-rank hunters has skyrocketed because the system now provides emergency plot armor buffs when death seems certain. It is a mercy that the old code never possessed. Jinwoo Sung remains the strongest existence on the planet. The silent guardian watches over the new peace. He spends his days quietly, often visiting the tear in the fabric of reality that still lingers faintly above Seoul. To others, it is just a distortion in the light. To Jinwoo, it is a window. He can feel the consciousness on the other side. It is vast, scattered, and constantly active. The man named Wade Wilson no longer exists in a biological sense, but his spirit permeates every pixel of the Hunter network. He is the operating system of the earth. He is the shield that keeps the outer gods at bay, not with walls of mana, but with a firewall, of sheer insanity. On quiet nights, when the city lights are bright, Jinwoo opens his status window just to see the text. It rarely gives him stats anymore. Usually, it just displays a simple message, scrolling across the blue screen like a marquee. Still here, still awesome. Don't forget to tip your waitress. Jinwoo closes the window and smiles. The burden of immortality is heavy, but he is not carrying it alone. He has a partner in the void, a glitch in the divine plan who turned a tragedy into a comedy. The story of the world continues, authored by a god and edited by a clown. And for the first time in history, the ending is not written in stone, but in crayon. The future is uncertain, chaotic, and safe.